Hello, welcome to our KPL webinar, Response to COVID-19, talking to children about stigma and racism. We're going to start with introductions.
Hi, this is Kimberly. I'm a family engagement specialist with the Kaleidoscope Play Learn program at Child Care Resources here in Seattle, Washington.
And I'm Nicole Flores, also family engagement specialist for Child Care Resources. Why are we here today? We're here today to provide resources, support our KPL community, share any new information or updates, and to continue to build community. Our agenda for this webinar is to go over objectives, provide a COVID-19 update if there are any, and to get into the content, which is talking to children about COVID-19 in relation to stigma and racism. Our objective for the webinar are as follows. We want facilitators, affiliates, families, and communities to receive support that's needed. We want everyone to stay updated and informed. We want to learn from this COVID-19 situation together, including what impacts it's had on KPL and communities served. And we also want to focus on community strengths. All right. We realize that this webinar topic is a little heavy, and we encourage you all to please take breaks when needed while watching or listening to this webinar. Please watch at your own pace. There will be a few terms that are introduced in this webinar that expand on previous ones, like the webinar on how to talk to children about race. So this will be a little bit of a review if you recently watched that one. If you have not watched that webinar, we encourage you to do so, as well as the first webinar we did on talking to children about COVID-19, which approached the topic in general. Some norms to consider when having conversations around race are listening to others, being kind and respectful, making sure your participants know it's a safe space for everyone to express thoughts, ideas, concerns. And also keep in mind that this is a journey of conversation and learning. It does not end with this webinar. We will not cover everything or solve everything in this session. Expect and accept. And maybe you may have other norms that you're thinking about, so please feel free to add those to your own list. Next, we're going to talk about why we're doing this webinar. We are doing this webinar because it's important and it's part of Child Care Resources' mission. Our mission at Child Care Resources is Child Care Resources improves all children's access to high quality early learning experiences by engaging with families, caregivers, and communities. Embedded in Child Care Resources' daily work is identifying and addressing racism so that all children thrive in their early learning environments. And our vision is that every child has a great start in school and in life. Our goal is to relate this topic to KPL setting. We hope that you all will feel more prepared and confident to address stigma and racism in the KPL setting with children and caregivers. We really want all of you to feel a little more comfortable addressing these conversations. And we're going to start with a little, we're going to start by doing some self-reflection. I would like to pose some questions for you just to think about, and then we'll pause for a moment before we move on. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of these questions. What do you know about COVID-19 as it relates to race? What are your life experiences that would influence your views on this topic? Do you feel comfortable talking to children and caregivers about this topic? What would encourage or discourage you from talking about this topic? What do you want to learn about? How does it make you feel? What have you heard and what have you seen? And we're just going to take a little pause for you to think about some of these questions. All right, we're going to move to the next slide, but we really encourage you to come back to this slide later if you'd like and think a little bit more about these questions, maybe jot some things down in a journal or on some paper, just to be thinking about some of these important questions.
All right, so the topic of this webinar focuses on stigma and racism related to COVID-19. So one of the first things that we wanted to do is to discuss what stigma is. And the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the International Federation of the Red Cross Committee have produced some content to define stigma, and I am going to read that for all of you. And their source, they specifically refer to it as a social stigma. So they say that stigma in the context of health is a negative association between a person or a group of people who share certain characteristics and a specific disease. In an outbreak, this can mean people are labeled, stereotyped, discriminated against, treated separately, and or experience loss of status because of a perceived link with a disease. Such treatment can negatively affect those with the disease, as well as their caregivers, family, friends, and communities. People who don't have the disease but share characteristics with this group may also suffer from stigma. The current situation with COVID-19 has provoked stigma and discriminatory behaviors against people of certain ethnic backgrounds, as well as anyone perceived to have been in contact with the virus. So that was a lengthier definition. In short, the way that we're talking about stigma today refers it to being meaning that there's an association of a person or group to the illness. And this can lead to discrimination and stereotyping. Stigma can be connected to all sorts of different things like race, culture, or gender, and so on. In the case of COVID-19, is specifically associated with race. Looking at the COVID-19 illness and situation through the lens of race shows us how stigmas can lead to the unfair treatment of people. During this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, groups that have been facing stigma at the local, national, and international levels include Asians, Asian Americans, Chinese persons, and people perceived to be any of these. It's important to note that this is not the first time stigma for these groups related to an illness has existed, and the content that we will cover today is not only relevant to COVID-19, but is also relevant to other situations where stigma has impacted these groups and other groups as well. So we also wanted to discuss a little bit about why there is so much stigma from the same source as the last slide. They have some explanation about this as well. The level of stigma associated with the COVID-19 virus is based on three main factors. One, it is a disease that's new and for which there are still many unknowns. Two, we're often afraid of the unknown. And three, it's easy to associate that with fear of others. So it is really understandable that there's a lot of confusion, also anxiety and fear among the public. However, unfortunately, these factors also perpetuate harmful stereotypes. And just take a moment here to pause to think about how COVID-19 is being discussed in the media, in our conversations, what narratives we're hearing in our communities, and think about how it's represented as well. That is also really important to reflect on as we think about stigma. Some reflection questions for you all to think about. What do you think are the impacts of stigma? And how do you think it might impact children, caregivers, and families in the KPL setting? So just pause for a moment to think about that. And on the next slide, we have some information about what the impacts of stigma can be. So the slide details how stigma can drive people to hide the illness to avoid discrimination. It can prevent people from seeking healthcare immediately. It can discourage them from adopting healthy behaviors. It can also undermine social cohesion and facilitate the social isolation of many different groups. In addition to all of these things listed here on the slide, it also causes people to treat others unfairly and poorly, whether it is intended or not. This includes children and adults. Stigma related to COVID-19 can impact a person's bias and result in racist behavior. So we're going to talk a little bit about bias and racism, and we're going to define those so that we are all on the page. And on the next slide, we have the definitions of bias and racism. Bias can be defined as our attitudes, beliefs, and stereotypes based on factors like gender, age, ability, language, culture, and so on that affect how we treat others, behave, and think. With bias, we unfairly show favoritism over one thing versus another. Our bias can be unintentional. When we are not aware of it, it is called implicit bias. Racism can be defined as bias based on race. It can be more hidden and expressed less plainly, which would be implicit, or more obvious, which would be explicit. So we're just going to pause and take a moment to let those definitions sink in because they're very substantial definitions. And we want to make sure that you feel you can absorb that and process it before we move on to the next content. Okay, so on our next bit that we'll cover, we want to spend a moment to talk about the racism that's going on right now. And right now, there is a lot of racism going on locally, domestically, and globally. This can be seen in our communities, in the news, in people's stories. There has been dialogue and conversation about how people believe that COVID-19 has made more people racist than ill, and how racism has spread faster than the illness itself. Racism against these groups had existed before. It's just that COVID-19 has amplified it. So the groups, again, that have been subject to this racism include Asians, Asian Americans, Chinese persons, and people perceived to be those things. And it's important to also know what this kind of racism looks like when it is happening toward these groups. So that can be seen through verbal and physical attacks, social avoidance and rejection, spitting, refusing a service, children being bullied, teasing, racial slurs, refusing service, and even denial of things like housing, healthcare, education, employment, and so on. We have this source called Asian Americans Advancing Justice, called AAJC, and they collect stories to track hate related to COVID-19. Their website has report forms available in many different languages, including Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, and so on. There are other entities tracking hate crimes and racism related to COVID-19, and this is just one that we wanted to highlight. And it's significant to highlight because it's really important to report these types of incidences. One of the reasons we do want to report them is that we want to inform the public about what's going on. We also want to empower others to use their voice and come forward. When hate crimes happen, we want to show service providers where help is needed. And we also want to strengthen advocacy around addressing racism and hate, and also to help promote prevention efforts. It is also really significant that people take time to read other people's stories related to this. We want people to understand the reality of what people are facing in the wake of COVID-19. And the reality is that the hate crimes and racism that are happening are likely even to continue after this phase of the virus passes. In order to prevent and stop these types of incidences, we have to understand how it surfaces and what it can look and sound like. So if you or anyone else or your network or your community may benefit from learning about this source to share your story or to read more about what's happening, we encourage you to check out the link and do so. Another perspective on how COVID-19 is greatly impacting specifically communities of color can be seen through the lens of data. And not all of you, but many of you who are viewing this webinar right now are from Washington State or King County. And King County Public Health has released data focused on the racial inequities that relate to COVID. And this is just one example of how COVID is disproportionately affecting communities of color. So we have the link here if you're interested in looking it up later and reading more about it. There's a publication. I will read out loud the quote on the slide that's taken from the article that highlights the magnitude of the impact. The data shows that rates of confirmed COVID-19 cases for Hispanics, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders is 4 times that of whites. The rate of confirmed cases for Blacks is double that of whites. That's a really heavy statistic, and we encourage you all who are not in King County or who are not in Washington State to look for information in your local area about the inequities related to COVID in your neighborhood and in your county, in your state, to understand how communities are being impacted, which include the KPL communities that you're serving. And the next slide also talks about data a little bit more. It's really important to have the context of the inequitable impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, especially considering the populations that KPL serves. So KPL is a national program that serves an enormous number of participants who identify as people of color, refugees, immigrants, minorities, and so on. And understanding how COVID impacts these communities is really crucial and is really vital. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has a source on how racial and ethnic minority groups are impacted, and we encourage you to check out this link and to do a deeper reading for a greater understanding if you're interested. But in short, we will summarize some of the main points that the source makes so that we are all on the same page with this background knowledge. So what's highlighted in this source is that communities of color and minorities are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 for a variety of different reasons. And one way to look at it is that our health, anyone's health, is impacted by where we live, learn, work, and play. And these outcomes really lead to different types of health risks, needs, and outcomes. And so the reasons why communities of color and minorities are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 include that these groups are more likely to live in densely populated areas because of current and past realities of residential housing segregation. It's harder to implement distancing and other prevention measures in environments like this. These groups are more likely to live in multi-generational households, which makes it more difficult to implement prevention measures if space is limited. They're more likely to live in neighborhoods further away from grocery stores and medical facilities. And they're overrepresented in jails, prisons, and detention centers, which have higher risk of COVID-19 because of congregate living and shared spaces. Risk of infection is also greater among essential workers because of a high percentage of these workers are people of color, for example, those living in the food and service industry. We also want to note that critical workers may have a lack of paid leave, which makes it more difficult to take time off when they're ill. So there is a lot to unpack in terms of inequities. And we also want to acknowledge that people with special needs and disabilities face many challenges as well. And especially those that are navigating many multiple layers. So for example, someone may be in the at-risk category and also a person of color who lives in a dense population and lives further away from medical facilities and groceries. And that intersectionality causes a lot of stress and deeper challenges. And we want to acknowledge that as well. So we're going to take another pause to absorb all of that information and process before we move on to the next section about what is our role.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next slide. And we are also going to take a pause here just to think about, as a facilitator, what is your role in this? What role do you have towards your participants when it comes to this topic? So I'm going to pause right now and let you think about that. All right, we'll start with this one. As a facilitator, it's your role to talk about this with children and also to support others, to support participants who are adults. I know these conversations can be uncomfortable and sometimes really hard, but we have many resources to support you all in having these conversations. We have lots of webinars and even have some information coming out in a lesson guide. And so if you feel like these conversations are difficult because you don't feel like you have the information needed, please feel free to reach out to the team and we can direct you to some more support that can help with these conversations. I'm going to show a short video right now. But also I wanted to first remind you all that If you haven't had an opportunity to see the webinar we did on talking to children about COVID, the first one we did, please watch that when you get an opportunity to. This video does a recap of what we talked about, but that was a really great webinar and we just really encourage you to take a peek at it. So I'm going to go ahead and show this video.
News of the coronavirus is everywhere, from the front page of the newspaper to the playground where kids are playing with their friends. A lot of parents want to know how they can talk about this illness with their children in a way that provides reassurance and doesn't increase their worries. Here is some advice for talking to your children about the coronavirus. Don't be afraid to discuss the coronavirus. Most children have already heard about the virus or they've seen people wearing masks, so they know something is up and you should not be afraid to talk to them about it. Not talking about the coronavirus can actually be worse because kids can worry more if they think that you're avoiding talking to them. So use this as an opportunity to talk to them about the facts and to have a conversation without all of the emotion that they might be seeing in the news and hearing in school from other kids. We recommend that parents are the ones who consume the news and give their kids information that is factual and not so emotional or exaggerated. So use this as the opportunity to be the one to give kids factual information about what's going on with the coronavirus. Be developmentally appropriate. Do your best to not share too much information with your kids all at once because this can be overwhelming. What you really want to do is answer them honestly and clearly and give them the information that you have. It's okay if you don't have the answers to all of their questions right now. You really want to take your cues from your child and answer what they're asking you. We recommend that you invite your children to ask you questions and to tell you the kinds of things that they've been hearing, and then you can tell them if that's true or not so true. We definitely don't want to ask them too many questions because that can encourage more frightening fantasies. The point of the conversation is really more for them to come to you with questions and things they've heard and for you to correct misinformation and give them the facts at hand right now. It's very important for parents to deal with their own anxiety first. Many of us are feeling pretty anxious ourselves about the coronavirus, but what we want to do is make sure that we're calm before we're talking to our children about the virus. If you notice that you're feeling particularly anxious at a certain time, make sure you stop and feel more calm before you have this conversation with your children. It's important to be reassuring with our kids. Children tend to be pretty egocentric, so it's common for them to worry that they will contract this illness or that you or other important family members will get sick. It's helpful to reassure your child that they are not likely to get this illness. It's actually a pretty rare illness at this point, and we think, from what we know so far, that kids are not as likely to get it. Focus on what you're doing to stay safe and healthy. Kids feel empowered when they know what they can do to keep themselves safe, so that's why we're emphasizing things like washing their hands. And they should know that this illness is transmitted usually through coughing or touching contaminated surfaces. During these kinds of stressful periods, it's important to stick to your routine. We don't like uncertainty. It tends to make us anxious, so sticking to routines is a way to maintain some predictability during these times of crisis. This is particularly important if your child's school or daycare shuts down. Make sure you're taking care of the basics just like you would over spring break or a regular summer vacation. Structured days with regular meal times and bedtimes are a really important way to maintain routines and predictability during this time. Something that's very important is that you keep talking, especially as we learn new information about this illness. Tell your kids that you will continue to inform them of any new information that you learn and that you want to keep the lines of communication open, so this is not just a one-time conversation, and tell them, even though I don't know the answer to this question right now, as soon as I have more information, mom or dad will definitely get back to you and let you know the answer to this.
Yeah, there's some really good tips on this video. One thing that really stuck out to me was when she mentioned giving information to your children, clear information, and not allowing them to see it through the news or the media, because that can tend to be exaggerated, which I totally agree with. I can imagine it's really scary for adults to see some of that information, but as adults, we're able to sort of process. We know what that means when it's exaggerated, but for a child, they might see something on the news or on TV that is very upsetting and disturbing to them. So I really like that tip, and to keep talking to your child about it. This isn't something that you talk about once and then it goes away. It's something that there should be an ongoing conversation about it, and giving them new information like she mentioned. So great video. Please check out our webinar if you haven't. And yeah, we'll move on to the next slide.
So in this next section, we're going to give some suggestions on how to talk to children about COVID-19, specifically about stigma and racism. So building off of the foundational knowledge that we just reviewed in the video we just watched. And so we have 6 suggestions, and they are not in any specific order per se. And the first one is to inform yourself. Informing yourself is really important. You want to inform yourself with accurate information, because misinformation is dangerous and creates fear and hostility and harms people. So COVID-19 is linked to a specific region in China, and it's important to remember that a person isn't more likely to have it or get it due to their nationality, race, or ethnicity. Knowing the facts help prevent assumptions and stereotypes, which you want to avoid. Children look to adults for information, so be informed and prepared. So that conversations, when they surface, you know your facts. If you don't always have the answer, it's okay. Just let them know that you don't know, but you will find out and get back to them. And you can, and make sure that you do follow up. And from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they have a source on stopping the spread of rumors that you can check out. It's linked here. And there is a line that we pulled and put on the slide. And I'm going to read the statement just to make sure everyone is clear about the accurate information about COVID-19. It goes, "It is important to remember that people, including those of Asian descent, who do not live in or have not recently been in an area of ongoing spread of the virus that causes COVID-19, or have not been in contact with a person who is confirmed or suspected of COVID-19, are not at greater risk of spreading COVID-19 than other Americans." So that is our first suggestion. And we have some nice kind of artwork and images to show you on the next slide about how viruses don't discriminate, from King County Public Health here in Seattle, Washington, as well as from UNICEF. And our second suggestion is to think about what words you use. Words matter. We want to avoid calling COVID-19 names such as Wuhan virus, Chinese virus, or Asian virus, refraining from associating race, ethnicity, a group of people, or a geographic location to the name. This puts people at risk and perpetuates stereotypes, so please remember to fight the illness, not the people. The official name for the disease was deliberately chosen to avoid stigmatization. The CO stands for corona, the V for virus, and the D for disease. 19 is because the disease emerged in 2019, and that comes from the World Health Organization. However, we recognize that children may have trouble disassociating COVID-19 with an ethnicity, race, or a group of people. And it is okay for children to feel a lot of feelings right now. They may feel fear, among other things. They may not be able to express their fears or articulate the thoughts they have in their heads, including assumptions or stereotypes that they have made maybe of other people. But through conversation, role-playing activities, play, and books, and so on, you can help explore these fears about COVID-19 and any feelings that they may have about various groups of people from diverse cultures. What's really important is that you address these feelings early and any thoughts related to it as soon as possible. A couple more suggestions, the third and fourth one. The third one is be a role model. Children notice what the people around them say and do. How you talk about COVID-19 and your actions related to it are noticed. If you want children to talk to others and treat others with respect and kindness and understanding, and you don't want them to stereotype or make assumptions about other people, then that needs to be modeled by you as an adult. If you want children to talk about their feelings and regulate their emotions, that also needs to be modeled by you. So if you want them to do it, then you got to show them how to do it, essentially. And the fourth suggestion, be proactive and be reactive. So what does this mean? So yes, respond to children's questions. Yes, address incidences when you hear or see something concerning, which is being reactive. But also have these conversations in advance, meaning be proactive about it. Start the dialogue early. Don't wait for something to happen. If children don't hear it from trusted adults, they may get their information from somewhere else, and that may be inaccurate information. And our last couple suggestions, the fifth and sixth one on the next slide, are encourage curiosity and empathy and keep it an ongoing conversation. So in terms of encouraging curiosity, children may do or say something that is embarrassing, and that is completely okay. When children ask something, they are trying to gather information and they're trying to learn. And it's actually good that they come to you looking for information. Encourage them to come to you when they are scared, worried, or curious. You can prepare yourself with having accurate info so that you can guide them in the right direction. In terms of empathy, a lot of people are struggling during these times. It's good to encourage children to understand that while they may feel confused and sad or whatever it is they're feeling, many other people feel that way too. In addition to being kind to ourselves when we feel sad, we need to be kind to others when they feel sad as well. And then the last bit, keeping it an ongoing conversation. This is something that Nicole touched upon after the video that we watched. We want to emphasize that this is an ongoing process. This is not a one-time conversation. This is not a one-time incident where we watch this webinar together or you listen to the webinar. This is an ongoing process of conversation, questions, activities, experiences, play, and books, and so on that you can do with the children in your group, along with the caregivers. This is something that will continue to likely come up in our lifetimes, and we want to make sure that it is being addressed along the way. So please remember to keep it an ongoing process so that we can keep addressing this topic through different mediums to enrich your understanding and learning. And that is what we have as it relates to talking to children about COVID-19, focusing on stigma and racism. And we also wanted to discuss how to support a child who has experienced stigma and racism. And some questions that we wanted you to reflect on before we dug deeper into this is, how do you think a child who has been targeted would feel? How would it impact them? And what support would they need? So maybe you've seen this happen before, or maybe right now you can put yourself in the shoes of a young child of color, and imagine what it would feel like to experience stigma and racism. And we'll just take a moment for you to reflect on that. So some examples of what a child may feel if they've experienced this include, but most definitely is not limited to, shame, fear, confusion, hurt, low self-esteem, anger, sadness, frustration, distress, reduced self-worth or confidence, isolation, anxiety, chronic stress. They may feel a desire to distance themselves away from their heritage, their roots. It may damage their identity. Those are some impacts that can have on them. Other impacts include social emotional, impacts on their behavior, may impact their play. What kind of support do they need during this time? This, for example, would include comfort, being assured that they do not need to deal with this alone, that they are not alone. The people that care about them, like the adults around them, their caregivers and facilitators at KPL can support them, that there are trusted people around them that they can go to. And if you can think of any others as well, please reflect on that right now too. And so in regards to supporting a child who has experienced stigma and racism, we have 5 suggestions on how to approach this. And so on the next slide are the first 3. And again, these are in no particular order. The first one is to name and recognize feelings. So it's really important to ask the child how they feel and let them know that it's okay to be sad or confused, frustrated, or any feeling that they're feeling, and to give them time and space to feel whatever it is they need to feel. So if they are stressed, give them space to help them calm down, help them to breathe. If they need to cry, let them cry. Even guide them to help identify like where they feel their emotions in their body, and to guide them to release it in healthy and expressive ways, like through play and art or music or physical exercise. You can suggest to them during this conversation that they practice a soothing, compassionate touch. So that could be a simple hand on the heart or a gentle hug for themselves, or maybe a hand on the head. You can talk about ways they can show kindness to themselves during this time to make them feel better. And of course, this should be also complemented with the adults in their life comforting them too as well. Our second suggestion is to gather more information and assess the situation. So it's really, really vital that it's assessed whether it's what happened, what they've experienced came from a one-time incident, or if it's ongoing, such as a pattern of bullying. And when you know this, you can more effectively address the situation, and you'll know how to get involved, and if other people need to get involved as well, to make sure that everything is okay and that the child feels safe. And also so that you can have conversations about what they can do if it happens again. In terms of assessing the situation as well, the circumstance is different when a child comes to you about something that has happened already versus you observe a child who has had an interaction with someone that has been concerning, and you, the caregiver, or parent, or facilitator, are there when it happens. So as an adult, being present in a situation where a child is hurt by stigma or racism and not saying or do anything to address the issue or their child's feelings, this is incredibly hurtful, can be incredibly hurtful for the child, and can demonstrate to the child that they are not worthwhile. It also can show them that this behavior is okay when in reality it is not okay. On the other hand, when it does intervene in some way and does acknowledge the situation and address it, as well as address the child's feelings and tries to improve the situation, this is incredibly powerful and can serve as a protective factor to mediate the pain that the child has already experienced. And yes, while a child may remember for the rest of their life something hurtful that happened to them, they will also remember how they felt when others around them stood up for them and defended them. When we are silent, we are complicit, and we have a role to advocate for children who are still growing and not yet able to advocate for themselves fully. It is our responsibility. So please, when you say something or do something within your KPL or outside your KPL, please say something or do something when you see something happening. Doing anything is better than doing nothing at all, even if your response is not perfect. And it's okay if you feel later that you could have done or said something different. That's normal to feel. The point is that you acted in some way to address the situation, and moving forward, you can make amends and adjustments as needed. As long as you learn from the experience and can apply what you learn moving forward to practice and grow and having these conversations, That's really what the heart of it is at. And in reality, anti-racist work is very messy and it's not a straight line. And there will be many mistakes and many ups and downs. So it's just being okay with that and leaning into it, even if it's frightening. Otherwise, things will never change. And our last suggestion on this slide specifically is to provide comfort and assurance. Children need to know that the adults who care for them and love them and want them to be safe. And you as a caregiver or adult can let them know this and let them know that they're not alone. This is really important to foster the caregiver and child relationship. This helps deepen their trust and bond. And then our last two suggestions are on the next slide. And they are provide opportunities to foster healthy identity and keep it an ongoing process. So in terms of providing opportunities to foster healthy identity, this is important to help maintain a healthy connection to background roots and heritage, which can be done through play, games, food, traditions, customs, conversations, activities, experiences, and so on. And having this healthy connection can serve as a protective factor to any shame or embarrassment that they may feel because of their background due to stigma and racism. It's really important to do this during the early years as they are forming their cultural identity. The last suggestion, keep it an ongoing process to address and heal from mistreatment they faced and are facing. So like we said before, this is an ongoing process of healing and learning, and we need to give children space to process and come back from what has happened to them and to build their resiliency and help them express themselves through various mediums like we talked about, play, art, talking, books, physical activity, and so on. This is not something that can be erased when it does happen, an incident like this, but it is something that can be addressed over time properly. So that concludes our section on how to support a child who has experienced stigma and racism. And in the next section, Nicole will start the scenarios.
Yeah, we have a few scenarios. So when we did this webinar live, we were able to break out in breakout rooms, and our participants were able to kind of talk through these scenarios. So I'm going to go ahead and read scenario 1 and then take a little bit of a pause so that you can think about how you would react to this scenario, maybe what you would do as a facilitator. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And it says, a caregiver asks for your advice. They say that their child has been asking people in public if they have coronavirus. Sometimes they assume that another person has the illness based on their appearance, a person of Asian descent, a person with a mask, etc., and will say something out loud in public. The caregiver needs suggestions on what they can say to their child. As a facilitator, what do you say? So we're going to take just a little pause to kind of reflect on this question. So I would start with a good start would be talking about what coronavirus is. And we have something here that says coronavirus is a germ. Germs are very little and we can't see them. They travel from person to person and make people sick. Anyone can get these germs and get sick. It doesn't matter what the person looks like, how old they are, or where they come from. it's good that you have questions. You can ask me or whoever, because the people you see when we go out to the park, store, etc., may not want to talk about it. So just as a reminder, letting the child know to come to you, come to me with these questions, and we can talk about them. And so I think as a facilitator, another suggestion would be to send caregivers and families home with literature, with information on COVID, resources on how to talk to children about COVID. And also the suggestion would be to read a book that helps explain COVID-19. And again, we have many resources on this topic, a list of books that are good to talk about, not directly about COVID, but can help the conversation. And so I think that's a really good start for this scenario. Kim, did you want to add anything to that one?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and move to scenario 2. And this one says, you are facilitating a live virtual KPL on an online platform with video. Everyone is starting to log in. A caregiver and child log in. They appear to be of Asian descent. When they log in, their faces appear on the screen, and another 5-year-old boy points and says, "Do you have the Chinese virus?" Everyone hears, and the caregiver who just logged on looks surprised and bothered, but doesn't say anything. As a facilitator, what do you do? And again, we're just going to pause briefly just for you to kind of reflect on this question. Okay, so I think a good start for this one would really be addressing the comment. We definitely don't want to ignore something that was said. And something that can be discussed is, or just said very quickly, and I know this can be hard and uncomfortable and a little awkward, and it does require facilitators to think on their toes. But something that can be said very quickly is, actually scientists call the virus COVID-19. And again, more resources, more information, and then I would say after the group to talk to the caregiver and ask them how they're feeling after the KPL group, and kind of open a dialogue with them. And they might have more questions. They might want to expand on their child's comment a little bit more. So opening up that window to them and having a conversation is just a really great way to start a dialogue. Kim, do you have anything else to add to scenario 2?
Just emphasizing what you said about the kind of two-prong approach of the immediate response in the moment to make sure that it's addressed directly in a gentle way for the child to understand as well. Then also following up, especially with the participants that received this question, to make sure that they feel okay and comfortable, because we do want to make sure participants feel comfortable to come back and return to the space, and that they don't feel like that they can no longer do that because of any type of discomfort or embarrassment possibly. So yeah, I think both are definitely important.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Excuse me. Okay, we'll move on to, oh, go ahead. Did you say something?
I can read the next one, scenario 3.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So scenario 3. It is far into the future and your KPL has returned to meeting in person. The county and state where your KPL is located recommends face coverings, but does not require it. They also have relaxed the strictness for social distancing 6 feet apart. Your KPL group is diverse and participants from many backgrounds, Some preschool-age children who are of Asian descent come to KPL wearing masks, as it is the preference of their caregivers who also wear masks. There are a few 5-year-old children who are from other backgrounds in the group who yell at the children, "Why are you wearing a mask? Do you have corona?" and run around laughing while they pretend to be afraid to go near the kids. The kids with the masks look hurt and start to cry. As a facilitator, what do you do? So just take a moment to think about how you would approach this. And Nicole, did you want to start off with any
Yeah.
suggestions on how to?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. I think it's really important to address the children who are hurt and are crying. So to make sure that that the facilitator is checking in with them and the caregiver that I'm sure is close by as well. So checking in with a child, making sure that they're okay. If they want to talk about anything, just being there for the caregiver and the child. And also addressing, having a conversation around why people wear masks. Some people choose to wear masks because that's how they feel safe, while others choose to wear them because maybe that's how they feel safe. So there are many reasons on both sides why a person is wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. So I think addressing those is super important. So those are the two things that I'm thinking about. If you have anything else to add, Kim, please do. But those are the two things that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to approach it. It's so dependent, I think, also on the location of your KPL and how face coverings are being addressed and recommendations on young children wearing masks, and people have different preferences and needs that affect whether they choose to wear a face covering or not, or choose to let their young child wear a face covering or not. And so I would just recommend to inform yourself about the local recommendations and reflect on the needs of people in your group, and just be sensitive to that. So it's going to be different for every person. And that will help you navigate these conversations as well. And yeah.
And the rules in different places are changing a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just making sure you know what those are right now, because they're definitely changing. Okay, so I'll move to the next slide.
So this is a piece from King County Public Health here in Washington State. And I won't necessarily read this whole slide, but you can pause if you like to read the whole thing. But it basically details the importance of not discriminating against people who are wearing or not wearing a face covering. And this is important because there are, like we just said from the last slide, there are many different reasons why people would not wear them, including people's abilities to be able to safely wear them and take them on and off, people's communication styles. They may need to have the mask off to be able to communicate. There are also many communities of color who do not feel comfortable wearing a face covering based on how they may be perceived, and they are afraid of their safety. And so we need to understand that everyone is different in where they're coming from, have their own reasons to wear it or not in a certain situation. And we need to understand that people are making the decisions that are the best for them and what they think is for their community. So something to keep in mind as well.
Some other scenarios to think about, just to kind of think on, or what other situations have occurred that maybe we haven't discussed, and what other possible situations can you think of that may happen, and how would you respond? So I'm just going to pause for a moment and let you think about those. Right.
So we have lots of resources for you all to dive into after this webinar to continue this journey. The first one is of a training that I believe has, since this is a recording that you're listening to, has possibly already passed, but we encourage you to still check out this bystander intervention training. And from Holla Back, they have all sorts of trainings related to discrimination and racism and so on. So definitely check out Holla Back and their site for resources. We also have many types of materials related to addressing bias, stigma, and racism here in this slide, and how to talk to your kids about race specifically at the bottom. And then on the next slide, some more links to how to support children who have been impacted by discrimination, resources specifically for Asian Americans during this time. And we have local Washington State resources that we thought would be helpful for all of you, and then also especially for local folks. For those who are out of state, we encourage you to look at local resources also in your areas. The world's current events have happened and are deeply rooted in really long historical things that have been happening systemically for many, many years now. And so if you're interested in reading more about that and learning about history and racism, we have some links for you to read as it relates to COVID and Asian communities. And then also at the bottom are KPL webinars that Nicole mentioned in the beginning for you all to check out that complement this webinar really nicely. So that's talking to kids about coronavirus, and then also the racial equity webinar on Let's Talk About Race.
We also have some book lists. They were sent out a couple weeks ago, maybe less than, maybe about a week and a half ago or so. And so if you didn't receive those, please feel free to reach out to us. It went out to the whole KPL network, but we realized there might be some folks that are not on the list. And so please let us know if you did not receive that so we can get those lists out to you. Let's see. So we have them on social emotional development, healthy cultural identity, differences and diversity. And so there are many, many wonderful, great books on those lists. And we're happy to share them with you all if you have not received them. We also have our activities that we do each webinar. The first one for babies is music and singing. 10 ways babies learn when we sing to them, and using music with infants and toddlers. For toddlers and up, we have exploring name and self-portraits. And so there's some instructions on an activity and also a link for more information on pbs.com. We also do a book, and this week's book is Whoever You Are. The author and illustrator is Mem Fox, and you can watch that video here being read out loud on YouTube. We also have 2 wonderful lesson guides that we wanted to kind of highlight. And one of them is called Express Yourself. And it's about social emotional development and feelings and working through things and all of that. And also has some links to resources. And the other one is What's in a Name. So it goes really well with the activity that we added in there for the weekly activity. So I highly encourage you all to check these out. And just as a reminder, there are many, many lesson guides on the flash drive. And so please take a look at them because there's some really great ones. And sometimes you might just want to check them out for inspiration, and maybe some things work for your group and maybe some don't. So please utilize them in whichever way works best for you.
And we wanted to recognize the community members and our colleagues who were generous in giving their time to provide feedback and resources and support during the development of this webinar. And we have deep gratitude to all those who did so, including Sakithia at the Seattle Public Library, Helen and Connie at the Chinese Information Services Center, and Sarah here at Child Care Resources. Thank you for your help. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And also just want to remind you about the open door that we have here at Child Care Resources, and that we are here to help and support you during this time. If you feel like you need to continue the conversation with us for some guidance on how you can navigate the topics we talked about today, please reach out to us if you need to.
And excuse me, we would like to have you just kind of think about something that you'll take with you today, something that you feel like that was new that you learned from the webinar, or just something that maybe was a reminder. We just encourage you to maybe keep a journal and write about something that you can take with you today. And we hope that this will help give you some more information to better support your caregivers and families and young children. We also have some resources on the Child Care Resources website. We have a list of resources and activities, which if you click here, you'll be able to find those. And also a list of COVID-19 updates and resources on different topics as well. And you can also click here for our KPL YouTube playlist, where we have all of our webinar recordings that are posted, including this one will also be posted. Here we have the many sources that were used. These include photos, videos, resources, and sites that were used in this webinar. We get a lot of pictures from Unsplash, and also we use some of our own. So, excuse me. Please take a look at some of these. There's some really great stuff on there. Also, here you will find all of our contact information. Zavit is our child KPL coordinator. And there's information for Kimberly and myself and Zainab. And so please feel free to reach out to the team if you have any questions. Kim, is there anything else you want to add?
Just thank you everyone for viewing this today, and we hope that you gained something from it that you can use moving forward. And thank you for being part of this journey. It's something that we really appreciate.
Yes, thank you.